The day Luke Harper lost his home, he gained a dog. Neither event happened the way he expected. The home disappeared first. A week before winter, the bank finally took possession of the small cabin Luke inherited from his father. Years of drought and failed harvests had done what storms never could. They broke him. Luke stood beside the road holding a canvas bag while strangers nailed notices to the cabin door. Everything he owned fit inside a wagon. A bed, a stove, tools, several blankets. Not much else. The dog appeared an hour later. A large shepherd mix with thick brown and black fur wandered out of the woods and sat beside the wagon. Luke ignored him. The dog stayed. Luke started walking. The dog followed. By sunset, the animal still hadn't left. Luke stopped near a creek and built a small fire. The dog lay beside it immediately. "You don't have anywhere to go either?" The dog thumped his tail. Luke laughed despite himself. It was the first time he laughed all day. The next morning, the dog remained. By the second day, Luke gave him a name. Scout. Because the animal constantly wandered ahead before returning. Always checking. Always watching. Always finding things. 3 days later, Scout changed everything. Winter arrived earlier than anyone expected. Snow dusted the hills. Temperatures dropped sharply. Luke knew he needed shelter soon. Not next week. Now. The problem was money. He had almost none. Whatever he built needed to cost nearly nothing. So he wandered north looking for abandoned structures, old hunting cabins, anything useful. Most were already occupied or falling apart. Then Scout disappeared. At first, Luke wasn't worried. The dog often explored nearby woods. But after nearly an hour, he started searching. Eventually, he heard barking. Excited barking. The kind Scout used whenever he discovered something interesting. Luke followed the sound through snow-covered brush and over a low ridge. Then he saw the dog. Scout stood on top of a frozen hill scratching furiously at the ground. Dirt and snow flew everywhere. Luke frowned. "What are you doing?" Scout barked and continued digging. Luke climbed the slope. The hill looked ordinary at first. Then he noticed something strange. The ground beneath the snow wasn't entirely natural. Part of it appeared disturbed long ago. Almost shaped. Almost deliberate. Curious, Luke knelt beside the hole Scout created. Then he struck wood. He stopped immediately. Wood. Beneath a frozen hill. That made no sense. Luke cleared additional dirt carefully. A few minutes later, more wood appeared. Old timber. Weathered. Buried. His pulse quickened. Someone had built something here. Years ago. Maybe decades. He spent the remainder of the afternoon digging. The deeper he went, the more obvious it became. A structure existed beneath the hill. Not a house. Something smaller. Perhaps a storage room. A root cellar. A shelter. Darkness arrived before he uncovered enough to enter. But Luke couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning he returned immediately. Scout helped. Mostly by creating chaos. Yet by midday they uncovered what looked like a wooden doorway buried beneath earth and roots. Luke pulled hard. Nothing. The door remained sealed. He tried again. Still nothing. Finally he cleared more dirt around the edges. The ancient hinges groaned. Then moved. The door opened inward. Cold air drifted outward. Luke grabbed a lantern. Then stepped inside. His eyes widened immediately. The underground chamber remained remarkably intact. Stone-lined walls stretched beneath the hill. Heavy support beams crossed overhead. The room measured roughly 15 feet long and 10 feet wide. Not huge, but large enough. Dry too. Surprisingly dry. Someone built it carefully. Very carefully. Shelves still occupied portions of the walls. Old crates sat abandoned in corners. The structure looked forgotten rather than ruined. Luke slowly turned in a circle. Above him, several feet of earth covered the roof. The hill itself protected the chamber. Wind couldn't reach it. Snow couldn't reach it. Most importantly, winter couldn't easily reach it. Scout trotted inside and immediately curled up in one corner. Apparently satisfied with his discovery. Luke laughed. "You found a house." The dog closed one eye and ignored him. For the next hour, Luke explored every inch. The shelter needed repairs. Several support beams required reinforcement. The doorway leaked slightly. Ventilation needed improvement. But the bones remained solid. The more he studied it, the more one idea repeated itself. This could work. Not permanently. Maybe. But certainly through winter. And unlike building something new, most of the hard work already existed. Someone completed it long ago. Luke simply needed to restore it. That evening he calculated costs beside the fire. Extra lumber. Replacement hinges. a few tools, nails. The total came to $12. 12. That was all. Luke stared at the number. Because $12 represented the difference between freezing and surviving. The next morning work began. For 2 weeks he repaired everything. Every spare board found purpose. Every salvaged nail mattered. He reinforced beams, strengthened walls, improved drainage, built sleeping areas, added storage. Most importantly, he installed a small stove pipe running through the hillside. By the time heavy winter arrived, the underground shelter looked completely different. Not luxurious, not beautiful, functional, safe, home. People passing nearby occasionally noticed him working. Most laughed, especially when they discovered where he lived. You're living underground? You built a burrow, planning to hibernate. Luke ignored them, because every evening he climbed into the shelter and noticed something important. The temperature remained steady. Outside temperatures swung wildly. Inside barely changed. The earth insulated everything. The hill blocked wind. The underground chamber held warmth naturally. Scout seemed particularly pleased. The dog spent most nights sleeping beside the stove. Then December arrived, and with it came warnings. Hunters reported unusual conditions in the mountains. Temperatures falling faster than expected. Snow accumulating earlier than normal. Animals moving south. Every sign pointed toward one conclusion. A historic winter was coming. Luke sat beside the stove one evening listening to distant wind outside. Scout lifted his head suddenly. The dog always sensed weather changes first. Luke scratched behind his ears. You think we're ready? Scout thumped his tail once. Outside, snow began falling. Inside the hill, the shelter remained warm. But neither of them knew yet that the coming blizzard would become the worst storm anyone in the region had seen in 40 years. The blizzard arrived at midnight. Not with snow, with wind. Luke woke instantly when the first gust slammed across the hillside above him. The sound echoed through the earth like distant thunder. Scout raised his head immediately. The dog growled softly. For a moment, Luke simply listened. Outside, winter was gathering strength. Inside the underground shelter, everything remained calm. That difference felt almost unbelievable. He climbed the ladder leading toward the entrance hatch and opened it slightly. The wind nearly ripped it from his hands. Snow blasted sideways across the landscape. Visibility had already dropped to almost nothing. Luke shut the hatch immediately, then looked around the shelter. The lanterns glowed softly. The stove burned steadily. The stone walls remained dry. The temperature barely changed. For the first time since losing his cabin, he felt something close to confidence. The hill itself stood between him and the storm. The first day passed quietly. The blizzard intensified. Snow piled higher and higher across the landscape. Trees vanished beneath drifting white walls. Roads disappeared completely. Yet inside the shelter, life remained surprisingly normal. Luke cooked stew. Scout slept beside the stove. The shelter held warmth with very little effort. By evening, Luke noticed something remarkable. The stove required less wood than expected. The surrounding earth trapped heat naturally. Once the room warmed, it stayed warm. The hill itself became part of the heating system. Outside, winter worked constantly. Inside, the earth worked for him. The second day brought worse conditions. The wind howled continuously. Sometimes the sound rolled across the hillside like an ocean. Other times it screamed through the trees with enough force to snap branches. Luke checked the entrance carefully. Snow had already buried half of it. Instead of worrying him, the sight made him smile. The additional snow acted like extra insulation. The storm was strengthening the shelter, not weakening it. Scout seemed perfectly content. The dog spent most of his time sleeping, occasionally lifting his head whenever strange sounds echoed outside. Late that afternoon, Luke heard something unexpected. Barking, not Scout. Another dog. He frowned, then heard voices. Faint, distant. For a moment, he thought the wind played tricks on him. Then the voices returned. Human voices. Shouting. Luke grabbed a lantern immediately. Scout jumped to his feet. Together they climbed toward the entrance. Digging through the snow took several minutes. When Luke finally pushed open the hatch, the scene outside shocked him. People. A line of people struggling through the storm. Families. Children. 2 wagons. 3 dogs. Several elderly men. Luke recognized them immediately. People from the valley. The same valley where he lost his home. The same people who laughed when they discovered he was living underground. The same people who called it a burrow. Leading them was Jonas Hale. His beard was covered in ice. His face looked exhausted. The moment he spotted Luke, relief flooded his expression. Luke! Luke hurried forward. What happened? Jonas laughed bitterly. The storm. Behind him, several people shook their heads. One woman spoke quietly. Our roofs couldn't hold. Another added. The wind got inside everything. A man carrying a child looked toward the hill. We remembered what you built. Luke glanced at Scout. The dog wagged his tail proudly, as if he'd planned this entire thing. Without hesitation, Luke opened the shelter. Get inside. One by one they climbed down, and one by one they stopped. The reactions were all the same. Shock, disbelief, relief. Warm lantern light illuminated stone walls. The stove glowed comfortably. The temperature remained steady despite the chaos outside. Children immediately relaxed. Adults removed frozen gloves. Several people simply stood there staring. Jonas looked around slowly. This is incredible. Luke smiled. It was an old root cellar. Jonas shook his head. No. He pointed toward the room. This is a house. The shelter quickly became crowded. Blankets appeared. Food was shared. Additional sleeping spaces were created. The underground chamber that once seemed enormous suddenly felt much smaller. Yet somehow it worked. The earth around them created stability. The stove provided warmth. And the storm couldn't reach them. That night, while families slept peacefully, Jonas sat beside Luke near the stove. For several minutes neither spoke. Finally Jonas laughed softly. What? Jonas shook his head. Remember when people called this place a hole in the ground? Luke smiled. Hard to forget. Jonas looked around the shelter. The sleeping children. The warm stone walls. The comfortable air. Then he nodded. Turns out it was the smartest house around. The blizzard continued for 3 more days. Then 4. Then 5. People later called it the Great Freeze. The storm destroyed barns. Collapsed sheds. Buried roads. Entire sections of the valley vanished beneath snowdrifts. But beneath the hill, life continued. The shelter remained warm. The stove burned steadily. And every day Luke became more grateful for one stubborn dog. Because none of this would have happened without Scout. The storm finally weakened during the 6th day. Sunlight returned cautiously. When Luke opened the entrance, everyone stared. The landscape looked transformed. Snow covered everything. Some drifts reached the tops of fences. Trees bent beneath enormous white loads. Several buildings in the distance had collapsed completely. Yet the hill remained exactly as before. Solid. Protected. Unmoving. The underground shelter had survived effortlessly. Because the storm never truly reached it. The earth absorbed the attack. The snow added insulation. The wind passed overhead. Nature protected what was hidden beneath it. Over the following weeks, people visited constantly. Not to laugh. To learn. They measured walls. Studied ventilation. Asked questions. Several families immediately began building earth-sheltered storage rooms and storm shelters beside their homes. One afternoon, while spring sunlight finally started melting snow, Jonas stopped by again. Scout lay outside the entrance enjoying the warmth. Jonas scratched the dog's ears. You know, he said, this dog saved half the valley. Luke laughed. Maybe. Jonas pointed toward the hillside. No maybe about it. He looked at Scout. If he hadn't started digging, nobody would have found this place. Scout responded by rolling onto his back and demanding attention. Luke smiled. Because it was true. He had lost his cabin, lost his land, lost almost everything. Yet somehow those losses led him here. To the hill. To the shelter. To survival. And it all started because one stubborn dog refused to stop digging. As spring finally arrived and green grass emerged from melting snow, Luke stood outside the underground home, watching sunlight touch the valley. Scout sat beside him. The shelter hidden beneath the hill remained almost invisible. Most people walking past would never realize what lay beneath their feet. A warm home. A refuge. A second chance. Luke scratched behind Scout's ears. The dog leaned happily against him. Then together they looked across the valley where life was beginning again. The people who once laughed now understood. Sometimes the smartest shelter wasn't built above the ground. Sometimes it was hidden beneath it. And sometimes the best builder wasn't a man at all. Sometimes it was a dog digging at a frozen hill.